Today we will be doing the introduction to algebra. Okay, and algebra is an extremely important subject in math. So in elementary school, you've been doing arithmetic. And as you move on to middle school and high school, that's going to change to algebra. So on this video, I want to just explain a few differences between arithmetic and algebra, and also how you notate things in arithmetic and algebra. Or I guess you know how to notate things in arithmetic already, so I'll be showing you how to notate things in algebra. So in arithmetic, we just add, subtract, multiply. So add, subtract, multiply, and divide numbers, right? So we have things like 1 plus 5, which equals 6. We also have 3 times 4, which equals 12. Okay. But once you go into algebra, you start using letters. And the most common letters used are X, Y, and Z. I think X might be the most common letter used in algebra. Okay, so instead of having 1 plus 5 equals 6, you'll start seeing things like X plus 5 equals 6. And what does X equal in this case? Right? So notice how the questions become a little bit different in algebra. Okay, and same with multiplication. Instead of having 3 times 4, you could have X times 4 equals 12. And what does X equal? Now, notice that our multiplication symbol, this is supposed to be the multiplication symbol, right? But it looks too similar to X. This looks very, very similar to X. Okay, so in algebra, instead of using a multiplication symbol, we use a dot. Okay, or just nothing. Let me explain what that means. So when I'm trying to say 4 times, or X times 4, right, I'm trying to say X times 4, I can either use a dot for the multiplication, or I can just do x4. So I can either use nothing here, or I can use a dot here. When there's nothing in between a letter and a number, it means it's being multiplied. So you can see here why we're not using x as a multiplication symbol, because it looks very similar to x. So when you see something like this, when you see something like this, you don't know if it's saying x times 4 or is it saying x times 4, right? There's a confusion there. So that's why we don't use these anymore. We don't use these anymore. Instead of we use a dot or just nothing. Okay. And now important thing is when you're multiplying two numbers, so let's say we want to do 2 times 3. You're multiplying two numbers. In algebra, I've said that instead of using this as multiplication, we use a dot, right? But in this case, you have to use a dot. You can't use nothing here. If you use nothing here like this looks like a 23, not a 2 times 3, right? So you can only use nothing to mean multiplication when there's a letter and a number. If there are two numbers, you have to put something in between, or else it's going to look like a 23. Okay, so you have to put a dot here. Okay, and again, don't use x, because if you see this in algebra, we don't know if it means 2 times x times 3 or if it means 2 times 3. Okay, so that's some of the notation difference that we have in algebra that's different from arithmetic. So let me summarize that here. So use a dot or nothing. But this nothing is only between letters and numbers. Or yeah, letter and a number. Okay, so use dot or nothing to represent multiplication. Right, and another thing, for division, we've used, if you want to do 12 divided by 2, we've used this symbol here for division. So our answer becomes 6. Okay, we can use the same symbol in algebra, but it becomes much more common to use a fraction bar. So in algebra, instead of writing 12 divided by 2 like that, we use a fraction bar like this. 12 divided by 2 equals 6. Okay, so we're using fraction bars for division. And the reason is not because the division symbol that we had doesn't work well in algebra. It's more because the fraction bar works very well in algebra. I think you can do a lot more with fraction bars than just simply representing it as a division symbol. Okay, once you start thinking of this as fraction, you also see the connection between division and fractions. And because you're also familiar with operations with fractions, you can do a lot of composite functions using, or composite operations using division if you're using a fraction bar. So try to use fraction bars instead of that symbol there. Okay, so two main difference in notation for algebra is that you use a dot. Use a dot for multiplication, and use a fraction bar for division. Okay, so remember these difference in notation as you go into algebra.